Welcome to Liberal Banter with Liz and Olu. This week we'll be discussing Kamala Harris's tax plan for capital gains and some of the reactions that received. And there's been discussion online lately about the differences or similarities or potential concerns from people about influencers versus journalists and having access to politicians, especially after the DNC. So we'll weigh in on that because we do have opinions. Let's talk about the tax plan that Kamala Harris came out with. There are some bullet points from the tax plan that are getting a lot of attention from the press and media. One of the biggest parts was around taxing unrealized capital gains. And for those who are not aware, capital gains tax is something you pay when you buy an investment, it appreciates in value, and then you sell the investment. So usually you pay this tax when you sell an investment that has appreciated in value. But under the potential Harris-Walz tax plan, if you are worth at least $100 million, which is a very, 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 very large amount of money, if your worth is at least $100 million, you would be taxed on the appreciation for your investment, even if you have not sold that investment. And this is a change that people have expressed concern about, even though it, again, only applies to a very small select group of Americans. The other tax bullet points from her plan were, for example, raising the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%, which would bring in a lot of revenue for the government, obviously. And there was also a potential to increase income taxes for high-earning Americans. But the part that everyone was focusing on was the capital gains, unrealized capital gains tax.
I don't understand why anyone would be concerned about this unless they are literally amongst the 0.01% of taxpayers, right? Which is the people that this applies to. The fact that we're talking about this doesn't apply to, you and your second home. This doesn't apply to your 401k. This does not apply to the rent that you're collecting as a landlord. Some of the nonsense that has been talked about online, this doesn't apply to the investments that, most middle-class people have and most working-class people do not. So it doesn't apply to any of those folks. And the reason why making this change is important is that these high net worth individuals will claim that they do not have access to these unrealized capital gains. But the fact of the matter is that they get to borrow an insane amount of credit from banks at very, very low interest rates based on the value of their appreciating stock and assets, right? And so they always have unlimited flow of cash based on what they say their assets are. I think some of our listeners might remember that when Trump is borrowing from banks, which is one of the cases that have been brought against him, he puts a very high value on his properties and his businesses, right? And then when he is asked to pay taxes, then the value of those things are suddenly much lower. This is how they're able to get away with things where they're able to actually say to the IRS, well, I didn't make any money this year. I'm actually in debt, right? Because they're able to say this kind of things to the government. Meanwhile, they're able to just get unlimited cash flow from the banks based on their net worth and their assets. So they cannot have it both ways, right? And that is what this plan is trying to do. This plan is trying to get them to pay some taxes on the money that they are making and continue to have access to in real time.
I want to be thoughtful. I want to be empathetic, even though it's really hard for me to not just slap someone up the side of the head when they bring up these things. But again, as Olu said, this is there are, I think it's like 20,000 Americans max that this tax applies to. There are 300 million Americans. I mean, maybe half of them are children. At least 100 million Americans who exist, pay taxes, et cetera, et cetera. There's maybe 20,000 of you that this applies to. That's it. I cannot believe some of what I have seen online about the capital gains. People bringing up their mother's homes and saying, oh, my mom bought a house. Now it's worth $500,000 more than it is. And now I have to pay capital gains on it. No, you won't be paying this capital gains tax. Your mom's house is not worth $100 million. You won't have to worry about it, okay? You can keep your mom's house. I mean, you'll probably still have to pay some property taxes, but that doesn't mean you have to pay a tax just for holding onto your grandparents' home that appreciated in value. This is not a problem for like a huge amount of people. People are on of course, they're on Twitter posting screenshots and examples of how the tax might work. Like, oh, you bought a house, it appreciated in value. These are not your problem, okay? I cannot stress it enough. I've seen jokes where people are like, if you need to go to the gas tank and jiggle it at the end to make sure all the drops of gas fall into the gas tank, this is not a tax you have to worry about.
I am
it's
guilty
really not.
of.
Exactly.
This
is not your if you go to shop at Costco by yourself for yourself, this is not a tax you need to worry about. Okay.
Exactly.
If you know what is on sale at the grocery store, if you know the price of a gallon of milk, this is not a tax you have to worry about. Okay. Like, it's ridiculous. And the people who are spreading this information are doing it with this like this veneer of news and information, but it's factually incorrect. The tax plan does not affect you if you're not worth at least $100 million, and even in potential increase in income tax, if you don't earn at least $400,000 a year, you don't have to worry about this. Okay. Again, don't worry. I think what is happening is that some people on the Republican side say this as this will be the beginning of a slippery slope. You know, first they came from the people with $100 million and I said nothing. Then they came for the people with $50 million and I said nothing. Then they came for the people with $5 million. It's like, you're not going to be affected by this, okay? Stop letting these people who have a vested interest in not letting these taxes pass, because, again, they're the ones worth $100 million. Stop letting these op-ed think pieces by these people affect you. This is not your problem. I saw articles in Forbes, Fortune magazine, etc. People are reposting screenshots talking about, oh, one day she's going to come for the property for people who are worth $1 million. That is still not most Americans, okay? Like, I can't stress enough how much this is not a problem. People need to do their own research. That's what I'll say, and do it from reputable sources, not Twitter memes.
Okay, but I mean, even those reputable sources, right? You just mentioned Forbes. I forget who owns Forbes, but the Washington Post also posted a misleading article about this, and that's, Jeff Bezos, right? The New York Times, all their billionaire pals called them. There was that New York Times article that you sent me where it's like quotes from Mark Cuban and some crypto mogul, and they're all there, talking about how they're talking to this New York Times reporter, and they're essentially trying to pressure the Harris-Walz campaign by putting it out there through the paper of record that they are unhappy with this, right? So someone like Mark Cuban said that as far as he heard, that it's just a proposal still being bandied around. Nothing has been done about it. Another person said that it was going to affect, their investments in the U.S. and they might think about moving their investments out of the U.S. Another person said, well, don't tax the capital gains, tax the money that billionaires are able to borrow. And you're just there reading this. The reporters are putting this out there with no pushback, to this billionaire sources like, well, this is how much you've been able to get away with all of this while. Like, it's insane to me that billionaires can just call up reporters and put out their concerns and try to pressure a campaign that is meant to be for the entire citizenry. And the New York Times just publishes that without any pushback, without any explanation to the 99.99% of people who are not billionaires who are reading this. That's not how you inform people.
Yeah, that is true. We may disagree, I think, on the level of influence this type of stuff has, but putting it out there in itself is making a statement. And yes, it is their way of publicly sort of expressing their dislike of policies and campaign decisions. What I do think has influence, though, is people who are misinformed and miseducated, who are normal people, who spread wrong information on platforms that normal people actually hang out on, like Twitter or Threads, and post information there that's wrong, and therefore spreading the incorrect perception, let's say, about this tax plan.
Well, you and I completely disagree on that. Someone like Mark Cuban is quoted as saying that he actually is speaking to people within the campaign, right? This is a huge problem. The average person doesn't have any access or any representative who is able to call someone who is directly on a presidential campaign, right? And that's why what you're saying about regular people being mindful of what they put out is important. Y'all don't know who is on Kamala Harris's campaign. You don't have their phone number. Those billionaires do. They have them on speed dial. Like, please use some common sense, right? You don't have lobbyists. You don't have lawyers. And at the end of the day, even if this tax gains proposal comes into law, guess what they're going to do? They're just going to hire an army of lawyers to find them loopholes, right? Like, this is this is a sort of ridiculous thing, right? Like, you don't have those resources. You don't have lobbyists. You don't have high-paid tax lawyers. So why are you on TikTok foaming at the mouth about this?
Great point. And excellent way to segue to our next topic about journalists versus influencers, because you are correct. Yes, the billionaires have a lot of the journalists, a lot of the campaign people on speed dial. And when they want to get their feelings known and get their feelings out there, they usually text a journalist the way you would like phone a friend or something, which is perfect way to segue to our topic about influencers versus journalists. So what's going on with this, let's say, story is that during the DNC, influencers, and I mean that in the sense of like social media, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram influencers of a politically left-leaning position were invited to the DNC to participate. And this was the first time this had happened. They were formally invited by the campaign. There were sections of the DNC set aside for these content creators to create content. They were given access to people like Raphael Warnock, to people like Tim Walz, people like Kamala Harris. Important people in the DNC sat down with these influencers, had conversations or posted memes with them or made videos with them, and that content was then uploaded onto social media sites. And this really aggravated the, quote, serious journalists at the DNC. They felt, as we have discussed earlier, that they were not getting access to a lot of these political figures. And then it was very jarring for many of them to see these, 21-year-old kids going around making videos with politicians. And so there was a discussion that came up about who should have access to who at what time. Are influencers journalists? That was a very, very big part of it. Should an influencer have the kind of access that a journalist has? And to your point about billionaires texting journalists, they might be texting journalists. I don't think they're texting the TikTok influencers. I don't think Mark Cuban is texting, insert your favorite liberal YouTuber here. I don't think they are. And so there is a sense from the public perception that these influencers are a good way to learn what is happening with the election, learn what's happening with news, and get a perspective that's similar to yours along with actual information. And this is really aggravating journalists, which I find funny because we've just spent the last however minutes talking about these serious journalists and all of the things they do that annoy normal people. And then somehow they're shocked that people don't seem to be, continuing to follow them. And now people would rather, hear news from someone on TikTok.
I couldn't put it, better myself. I have no patience for this complaint from the national media. They have actually created the proto-influencers, right? Which were the pundits, right? Like, we used to have news without 4 talking heads, talking across each other. And then,
yes, we used to be a country.
plug in their book and their podcast at the end of it, right? Like, we used to have that. People like Maggie Haberman, what are they? As far as I'm concerned, it's like some kind of influencer access thing. Do I need to hear from Mary Trump? No, I do not, right? Like, they have
Definitely
created
not.
this cult of personalities. The Trump years was just insane to me. They would get information, they would sit on it until they could put it into their books, or until they could put it into their podcast. Like, it is just as much of a commercial exercise as the influencers are. I think the influencers are probably, a little bit more honest about it. Maybe they plug their facial serum at the end of their TikTok video. Great, right? But like, at the end of the day, that is literally what like these people are doing on the national media as well. So at this point, I actually don't see a difference between them.
Yeah, agreed. And to the point about facial serum, that's actually a good example, because when you watch some of the political YouTube videos or TikToks or whatever, you'll hear sentences or phrases like, "This video is sponsored by, NordVPN," or whatever. And by the way, if NordVPN is looking for other people to sponsor, we are available. But you'll hear those clips in that audio section, and you'll understand that, like, this is content sponsored by XYZ Corporation. You don't get that on CNN. Now, there's ads. There's ads, which are obviously ads. But during the actual news segment, there are portions of things that are promotional, but are not identified as promotional. And people are tired of having to identify those things. I'd rather deal with a 5-minute YouTube video where the creator tells me straight out the gate, listen, if you watch this video, I'm going to get paid by, SeatGeek. But also, here's the actual news we're talking about today. I'd rather deal with that than listen to CNN and have Maggie Haberman on to promote a book telling us, some new egregious thing that Trump did when he was president, but she hasn't told us for 4 years because she was saving it for a book, right? That kind of stuff just is really grating and rubs people the wrong way. And so I'm not shocked that influencers are getting attention and getting relevance where the journalists feel like they should.
Exactly. It's all access journalism at this point. It's all, I have the insider ear at this point, and they're all trying to use that to leverage them into, getting into a higher tax bracket. And if influencers want to get in on that racket too, this is capitalism. If you're failing at delivering good information, then someone else is going to provide it. I thought we were all capitalists here. What's going on?
Are journalists capitalists, though? I don't know. I think some of them still have this idea that they're not, and they're doing, the Lord's work. And some of them are. I feel like we're railing against journalists a little too much. There are still good ones out there. I guess let us know if you know them, but I'm blanking on names right now, but there's definitely some, maybe they're not as popular, but there are definitely good journalists out there. I feel like we have to say that. But yes, the industry, the journalism industry, has been through a lot in the last 2 decades, actually. And ever since the rise of the internet, journalism has been struggling. And so I think there's a lot of pressure on that industry that has nothing to do with TikTok influencers, but that's who is getting the current attention and vitriol, let's say, from mainstream media. I really think these two groups could work together. I honestly think some journalists could probably benefit from striking out on their own. You know, maybe don't wait till you're forced out like, I don't know, Chris Cuomo or Don Lemon, but like you can start your own thing. You don't have to work at CNN. You can do your own thing and become a quote unquote influencer. Your work might actually improve as a result. But yeah, I think what's happening is there's outside pressures on journalism, and that's what's playing out right now.
Oh, that's a very diplomatic answer, but I think
I'm trying
you're right.
to be nice.
You know, the lines are blurring, right? Even the traditional journalists like Don Lemon. And I mean, what would you call Megyn Kelly at this point? She's an influencer, right?
She is an influencer. If we're sticking to like pure, you know, if you're an influencer because you don't have a mainstream media backing, then she's an influencer. Don Lemon is an influencer. Chris Cuomo is actually back on a TV station, so never mind. But yeah, a lot of them are influencers.
All right. That will be all for us this week. If you like this week's episode, please do share. Please spread the word about us and have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.